Okay, good morning. For those of you who haven't met me already, my name is Nick. I am chair of the Conference Working Party. We are delighted to have you all here. I'm going to do a tiny little bit of housekeeping because there's some of you who weren't here yesterday. So we are fully booked. Please do squeeze into all of our spaces so we can accommodate latecomers. It's a slightly unusual setup in that it's an L-shaped room, so there is more seating over here. This seating is slightly cooler. It's in the shade. We encourage you to find your way around. You'll find around the edge of the room both the Wi-Fi details. I think it says Wi-Fi for Thursday, but it's going to work today as well. And also the conference hashtag. Please use that if you're using social media. We've got a very full schedule, so I will be keeping us to time as much as possible, as will the other panel moderators. In case anyone hasn't noticed, the large TV camera and AV unit, we are filming. We are filming those sessions for which we have received consent to do so. But obviously, if there's a Q&A, you will also be being filmed. If there's something that you prefer not to be shared, either, unfortunately, don't ask that question, or come and speak to us, and we will do our very best to edit you out. So, all of the delegates and speakers are wearing blue lanyards. Any of the conference working party are wearing yellow lanyards. This means you can come and ask us for help. And it is quite a complicated space. We're using lots of it, so we can help ferry you between different spaces. You will also notice in the back of your lanyards, there is an individualized program for each of you. So we're running many parallel sessions. So on each of these, this is not the complete program. This is just when there's more than one session happening at once, and it will say something like presentation panel B, 32 Bedford Square. 32 Bedford Square is this way. We will either be going through the office, if they'll let us, and you just go as far that way as you possibly can, and then through the office, through the bookshop, up the stairs at the very end. We might possibly have to go outside if we can't get through the office, but we will help you navigate that process. The only other thing I wanted to mention about this is that it says Saturday visits. Some of you will have already signed up for Saturday visits. These are obviously optional, but if you're interested in any of those and haven't yet done so, you can go and speak to our colleagues at the registration desk. There are some fantastic and slightly under-signed up for visits, so do come and talk to us. So that's more than enough housekeeping from me. I would now like to introduce our first keynote of the day, Leo Appleton. Leo is Director of Library Services at Goldsmiths, a large, multidisciplinary, left-leaning university. It's famous for the YBA generation of artists, the Centre for Feminist Studies, and Sara Ahmed's rather public resignation from it, from a long connection with the British cultural studies tradition, that it has buildings named after Richard Hogarth, Stuart Hall. It's a fascinating place. Those of you who were here yesterday will have already heard from Althea Greenan about the Women's Art Library there. Leo has a terrifying list of achievements. He's currently completing his PhD. He has more than one book project on the go. He edits, I think, 3 different journals. And most importantly, he's a very active member of ARLIS Council. So with that, please welcome Leo.
Well, thank you very much, Nick, for that introduction. You know your stuff, don't you? I have to say. You know more about Goldsmiths than I do. Okay, so, yeah, thank you. I'm Leo Appleton, and as Nick introduced me, I'm the Director of Library Services at Goldsmiths. Goldsmiths is an arts and social science college, part of University of London. And it's a real pleasure to be asked to do a keynote for ARLIS. Part of my talk is I wonder why I have been asked to do a keynote for ARLIS, but hopefully you get that from the title, and all will be revealed. But I've really enjoyed what I've seen and heard so far, albeit quite a lot of it yesterday morning on Twitter, but really lots of engagement, lots of positivity. Obviously, clearly, having come in the afternoon and being here now, a great dynamic and a great vibe. and just lots of really wonderfully rich and diverse content, which speaks volumes about what art librarianship is, and also validates for me that I'm probably not an art librarian. But again, more about that in a minute. Gustavo and Nick approached me and said, would I be a keynote? And I always, when people ask me things like that, I always say, yes, I do enjoy sharing experiences and kind of digging deeper in things. It's only after I'd said yes, I realised, actually, what am I going to talk about? And I sort of thought, well, I'll have a look for them, because I think I've got a loose brief saying you talk about anything, but if it fits in with one of the conference themes, all the better. So I think most of you will have seen the conference themes, and there's no stone left unturned there. So I had a lot of choice. I'm just going to read some of the themes out, potential themes when applying to the call for papers. Suggestions such as architecture librarianship, archiving the artist, art archives, art ephemera, art library and archive history, artist residencies, artist publishing, arts publishing, art research in London, barriers to entry, cataloguing, metadata, discovery, changing roles, classification, taxonomy, knowledge. I'll skip through a few now. Digital humanities, exclusions, absence, erasure from the arts library, exhibitions and curating, fashion and textiles. I'll skip through a few more. Libraries as artworks, library planning, etc., etc. Hundreds of themes that we could potentially talk about. So I looked through them all. I thought, no, I can't really speak profoundly about anything there. And so it kind of got me thinking, oh, really, I'm not an art librarian, yet I've been asked to do a keynote at ARLIS. So I thought, well, maybe that's what I should focus on, not being an art librarian, and basically doing a talk on all the things I can't talk about, or doing a talk about why I can't talk about all the things you're interested in, and practicing them. So I sent an abstract, and they said that was okay, yeah, let's do something like that. And my abstract went along these lines, which you'll have seen, it's in the programme handbook. Some librarians are born to be art librarians, successfully and seamlessly merging the two disciplines together in their daily lives. For many of us, though, we have to make a deliberate and measured transition from being a more general library and information professional at different types of library from a variety of institutions. And in theory, this often sounds quite straightforward, and quite a straightforward move for those who need to make it. But in reality, few can foresee the profound nature of the transition, and indeed the transformation of becoming an arts librarian. And then went on to say, I'll draw on some of my own experiences as to what that transition looks like, or certainly looked like for me. So apologies in advance. I'm presuming you're all here because you want to be, and you have read the abstract and the blurb, but this is slightly self-indulgent to start with, because my experience of being an art librarian is quite limited. I only moved into arts education less than 4 years ago, so I don't have that much experience to draw upon. But it's the backstory, and I suppose what that's meant to me as I've moved into the environment, which I want to be the focus of this talk. I've never really thought of myself as an art librarian, not even now. I've got a lot of close colleagues and a lot of close colleagues in the room who strongly and clearly identify with that label, or sorry, that title of art librarian, but it's not a label that I've ever given to myself. Yet somewhere inside me, I think there's a little bit of it. I'm not entirely sure. But maybe this presentation and me publicly reflecting on bits of my career, what I've learned and where it's taken me into art librarianship, maybe that will help in 40 minutes' time, help me cement who I am, and maybe I'll be a little bit clearer about my own identity. Okay, so my presentation on not being an art librarian takes the form of 7 short reflections, which will allow me to share with you my experiences. My experiences of being a librarian, as I said, not necessarily an art librarian, but hopefully I can illustrate how my general library experiences and skills have transferred into this arts education world, and more importantly, I think, vice versa, certainly now working again in a more multidisciplinary environment, how those arts librarianship skills transfer back into such an environment. I don't know if you can read the little cartoon on the left. I'm just setting my stall out and declare myself an imposter in ARLIS, even though I'm on the council, an imposter at this conference, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that later on. But from the outset, this is coming from a not being kind of in the movement or in the environment. But first, just so I can gauge who I am and benchmark against yourselves, I've got a little activity that I need you all to take part in. Because what I want to do is just measure the level of art librarianship in the room. I'm using art librarianship in its very broadest sense, so I hope you can work with me on that. So, I've got a little exercise to engage you all. I need you all on your feet, if that's okay. And royal boxes. Okay, so this is just very light exercise. Don't read too much into the questions I'm asking. Interpret them as you will. But stay on your feet, please. If you describe yourself, either currently or in the past, as an art librarian. Oh, no, I wasn't expecting that. This could be over very quickly. Okay, so we've got everybody on. Let's just make sure you're all clear. Everybody on their feet identifies with being an art librarian or has in the past. I'd say you do, Laura. Okay, stay on your feet if you buy a lot of books with pictures and illustrations in, or recommend lots of books with pictures and illustrations in. Okay, good. It's working. Stay on your feet if you've ever used object or artifact to teach with. Okay, so we're getting to the hardcore arts librarians. Are you sure, Rishenda? No, I'd say you have. Stay on your feet if you are an art historian, an appreciator of art, or an art lover in general. You like art. You do, Nick. Okay, good. Stay on your feet if special collections form part of your collection development policy. Stay on your feet if you've ever bought a painting. Ever, anywhere, kind of. Yeah, just trying to gauge how much you like art. Repeat the last one. Have you ever bought a painting? Or piece of art. Let's call it a piece of art. But you had to be on your feet before that. Yeah. Oh, I've gained a couple back. Stay on your feet if you've ever think you've dabbled in critical librarianship. Okay? Stay on your feet if you are a practicing artist or creative practitioner, or consider yourself to be so. Okay, so everyone look around the room. These are our hardcore art librarians, but most of you started in that place. Stay on your feet if you've ever curated something, be it an exhibition or web content. So again, I think we're down to single figures now, we're down to. Stay on your feet if you've been part of an art assessment team, maybe involved in a crit or been called upon to cast a value judgment on art. Very hardcore. I've run out of questions, so if I had prizes, you would get the prizes for being our most hardcore art librarians. Now, sad to say, I couldn't answer yes to any of them, which is why I've used that as a measure. Yet I'm the one here standing talking to you. So as I said, I've got 7 short reflections. I now know where I am and who I'm with, having done that exercise. And if you'll allow me, short moment. I will just literally talk through these reflections, and hopefully that will help me with my identity and also talk about what it means to be an art librarian. So my first reflection is called The Academy in the Art School. And this is a little bit about me and my background. So as I said, I didn't enter art libraries really, well, not at all, until 2014. So that's only 4 years ago. I started out working in Russell Group universities, in the University of Liverpool and the University of Newcastle. And I had particular roles. One was a library assistant in the cataloguing team, and one was a senior library assistant in the kind of wider bibliographic services team. So quite niche jobs, a good entry-level job, and put me in a kind of these big research institutions. I'm not going to dwell on that. The point is I had absolutely no, no involvement with anything to do with art libraries. I didn't actually have anything to do with students or people who used libraries. It was very much a routine position. My next move took me to a university called Edge Hill. I think you've probably heard of Edge Hill University. It was Edge Hill College of Higher Education at the time. And that was as a liaison librarian. I had 2 hats on. One was liaison librarian for health studies, and the other hat I wore was as the hospital trust librarian. So we delivered services to the hospital trust, actually 4 hospital trusts, which the Faculty of Health was on the site of a hospital. So ultimately, it was a health library experience, nothing to do with art. But you're acquiring skills all along the way, and actually being a liaison librarian is probably like the most transformative role I've ever had, because that's where you are introduced to or have quite a high impact on your users, and in this instance on nursing and midwifery students. It got me into teaching and learning, it got me into electronic resource management, so a whole plethora of kind of library things, library stuff and library skills that I hadn't until then been exposed to. And similarly, working in that health environment with clinicians and with health practitioners, quite a different experience, and all really valuable as you move through your career. My next moves were into further education colleges, and I worked in two over a period of 5 years as the learning resources manager. So one was called BERG College, which was a kind of basic tertiary FE college, about 10,000 students in a suburb of Liverpool. And the other one was West Cheshire College, slightly bigger, had about 40,000 students. But what I'm trying to do here is illustrate my non-art environment at any one of these particular times. Now, both those colleges, as I suppose former art college, well, former certainly technical colleges, delivered art and design programs, but they delivered art and design programs in amongst this kind of wealth of other programs. And so things like hairdressing and beauty therapy, motor vehicle engineering, construction, plumbing, scaffolding, floristry, along with more things like media studies, business studies, and some kind of A-level studies. So actually any focus on art and design was really lost in that mix. And I think anyone who's worked in further education colleges know that the real demand on having to be very generalist and support everybody rather than trying to specialise and support particular subject areas, even if you're in a particularly well-resourced FE college, and I was in West Cheshire, but you're still spread very thin, and a lot of your time is taken up with crowd control more than kind of developing very technical librarianship skills. Don't get me wrong, very enjoyable and lots of contact with students, but not necessarily at the level of detail that you would like to as a practicing librarian. But again, lots of great experience, but still no real experience of art students or being in that art and design environment. My next move, I was telling someone I actually left FE 10 years ago today, and then moved back into HE at Liverpool John Moores University, where I was Associate Director of Library and Student Administration. And that really is now as far away as you can get from being an art librarian, because 80% of my time is taken up with academic registry type things, because student administration was, I suppose, all the things you would expect from an academic registry. So it's coursework submission, mitigating circumstances, student loans, UK Borders Agency and visas, etc. So all of that was subsumed into the library. I still got to do a little bit of library stuff, a little bit of librarianship, managing the library teams, but still no real interaction, I suppose less interaction than ever with actual students. And it's ironic because Liverpool John Moores actually has the Art and Design Academy, which is formerly Liverpool School of Art, which is actually quite famous and used to be really high profile. But it's kind of now been subsumed into a kind of much bigger faculty, into a much bigger, what is essentially a STEM institution. Is everyone familiar with STEM? Because my next slide's called STEM versus STEAM. STEM is science, technology, engineering and maths, which is what I think is the default for most HEIs in the UK. And we have this notion of STEAM, where you could add the word art into the middle of STEM. But I'll come on to that in a minute. But all those roles, whilst I'm still not in an arts environment, I've learnt an awful lot, and I've developed lots of skills, lots of understanding along the way. Certain very kind of fundamental library skills, but I suppose latterly those leadership and management skills, which really help you when you enter new environments and have libraries to manage or library practice to manage. And I'd also learnt that I do think that STEM is the default, as I've just said, in lots of higher education environments. Now, I think if you work in arts environments, you may not necessarily always realise that, because you are surrounded by art and artists and creative practice. But when you're in a STEM institution, it's a massively different environment. And I know a lot of you will have worked in STEM institutions, so you'll be able to empathise with that. And so I just wanted to dwell a little now on this, what I'm calling STEM versus STEAM. And I think we all appreciate that a lot of universities who kind of place themselves as STEM institutions do so because of the research that they output and the value of the research, or the perceived value of the research, when you're coming from a science and engineering institution. But back in 2014, I made this I suppose, quite peculiar move from Liverpool John Moores University to the University of the Arts London. And I moved to UAL as Associate Director of Library Services. Not entirely sure of my thinking at the time of why I needed to do that move, but I think some of it was I felt a bit too watered down at Liverpool John Moores, having this far too much breadth of responsibility now, and did want to refocus back on being a librarian, but just being a librarian, not necessarily being an arts librarian. So I considered it a sideways move at the time, but into a new and exciting environment, which would provide me with the professional adventure and development that I think I needed at the time. And it was indeed, I think most of you probably know University of the Arts London, that most of you are probably from University of the Arts London. So you'll have a good feeling for what that environment is like, and it's massively different to the environment that from whence I had come. Because I'm really just a library manager. You may say a library leader, but that's subjective, that's entirely up to yourselves. But I do like to think that my strengths are in leadership and management. And on entering art libraries, I did find I was obviously quite able to transfer some of those leadership and management skills into my new setting. And I think some of those strengths were things like ensuring a sense of team amongst the other library managers that I was responsible for, and hoping that their shadows would be cast on their teams so we could really develop teams, enabling collective problem solving, consistency and approach to running services across a number of colleges, and you know, ensuring that my site managers were able to motivate their staff and kind of embed responsive staff development, listen to staff, all things that I'd done in those other management positions that I was actually finding that bit quite easy to transfer into this new arts university. But meanwhile, whilst I felt, yes, this is great, this is transferable, something did feel very different, maybe a bit different, but I'd say quite different. And that was a word that was used quite a lot. So you're working in arts libraries now, and it's different. So don't try and compare STEM and STEAM. It's different. And my first realisation that arts librarianship was indeed different actually happened a few years before, whilst I was still an associate director at Liverpool John Moores University. And I can't remember where it was or who I was talking to, but I was talking to an arts librarian. I'd never met one before, really. And I was talking about collection development and what I was in the middle of doing, kind of advocating a digital-first policy on the collection and quite a radical approach to stock relegation and withdrawal. And I was just met with, well, you can't do that in my library. I'm an arts librarian, and my students need print books to read, to learn from, and that's that. And I thought, oh, well, that's quite different and defensive, and it sort of surprised me. And in hindsight, it shouldn't have surprised me, but it did at the time. And I think on reflection, that this surprise might well have been an epiphany moment for me in that kind of my next journey of maybe becoming an arts librarian and realising what that entailed. I thought nothing further of that conversation at the time, and it's not until I arrived at University of the Arts London, started so take the leadership and management I think is transferable, but trying to apply some more of my general ingrained STEM attitudes into the new environment. We're quite often told, no, that won't work. You can never do that here. Not over my dead art librarian body, will you implement that here? All done very amicably and in a very nice way, in a constructive discussion. And it's then I started to recall this conversation that had taken place some years previously. And then I kind of realised, gosh, I have got some ingrained, what I'm now going to call STEM librarian attitudes, that I probably need to realise and either work on or adapt to fit in with the new environment. That said, I think I got, well, there's plenty of people here who can testify otherwise, but I think I got off to a good start at UAL and worked well with the teams. And I think essentially I was blending into this new environment, but it's there when I started to feel like a little bit of an imposter. And if I'm honest, I still do, because in the blurb for this conference, I'm labelled as a leading UK art librarian. And personally, I think I'm anything but that, as far from that as you can get. I'd say a lot of you are probably leading UK or international art librarians, but that's not something I would associate myself with. So I think that starts to make me feel a little bit of an imposter, which I can handle, but imposter syndrome, so that very first cartoon, is probably something you've heard of, and it is a real thing. At its root, imposter syndrome is characterised by a reverse attributional process wherein sufferers attribute success to external reasons, so things like luck, charisma, favourable circumstances, misjudgment of the recruiters, and in my case, fluke. So, and it also occurs when the individual attributes their failure to internal reasons, largely that they're not as smart or intellectual or professional or technical as the people that they're working with or as people perceive them to be. And I certainly do, that does resonate with me to a bit, to an extent. And I do kind of think, have I missold myself somewhere to be in this position of responsibility in an arts environment? Do they think I'm something I'm not? But that's something I need to kind of get over and handle. But what, excuse me 1 minute. What I did realise, and even if that is the case, I need to adapt to the environment and see what I've got in this environment. And what really stood out for me was the actual arts librarians that I was now working with, lots of them at UAL, so what a great environment to be introduced to arts librarianship. And the passion that my colleagues had. And what I'd thought I might be now kind of encountering was something I'm going to label art librarianship capital, a real thing. And I've seen my colleagues generate what I'm calling art librarianship capital. So if you think of things like social capital, intellectual capital, transactional capital, human capital, my thing is art librarian capital. I think there's something special and different about art librarians, which we use to our advantage. We use it when we're liaising with academics. We use it when we're kind of collaborating. We use it when we're talking to and teaching our students. And it comes from a genuine passion for what you're doing. It comes from a genuine passion for being in the arts environment. If you have a love of art or you're an art appreciator, that goes into it. And that love and that kind of enthusiasm for supporting people in the arts. And you add to that loads of creativity, which I think we as a community have, and those technical librarian skills, attitudes and behaviours that we all come with as well. So hang on to Art Librarian Capital. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. What I'm now realising, having now worked at UAL, I'll move on to my little bit of Goldsmith's journey in a moment, is that, art librarians are different, but that's my new environment. So I'm the one who's seen as different. So I'm the one who needs to adapt or make sure I play to my strengths, but now include all the strengths of this art librarian environment in my practice, in what I do. I'm not going to go through that list. That's just kind of not random words. I've obviously thought about them to put them up there. But There are things that I never thought about when I was a STEM librarian. So things like makerspace and visual learning and critical librarianship and art appreciation and meta-literacy. A lot of that is things that really didn't concern me as what I'm calling a STEM librarian. And that's what we have. That's what we have on our plate. I'm sure you can pick and mix those concepts there. But in addition, you've still got to do all the other stuff. So we've still got liaison roles, we've still got functional roles, we still concern ourselves with metadata and cat and class, and we make that more difficult because we think critically about that as well. So that adds another layer to that. Widening participation is still a thing, it's still an issue. Learning spaces, special collections and archives, all this business as usual, marketing, library management systems, budgets, open access, scholarly communications. So all the regular things that librarians are dealing with and contending with and working towards, plus all of that. So it makes for this, I think, even richer, more dynamic, more exciting environment in which we can work. Thanks, Nick. None of this is backbone stuff. So there's lots of things that we do as librarians and as art librarians. And those of you who work in an exclusively arts environment, that will mean more to you. You may do this all the time. So some of you may work as lone art librarians in a bigger institution. This should still resonate with you. It just won't make up your kind of all day, every day, but it's certainly some of the differences of being an art librarian that you'll have to apply and you'll have to practice. So I'm just going to I think this is my penultimate reflection. Where do students fit into all this? Because I've talked really about us as people, as librarians, and our skills and our attitudes and our behaviours. Excuse me. But I've also realised, unfortunately I realised this many years ago, that I'm not in this game really for the love of a subject discipline. I don't really do this. I'm not a librarian because I align myself with STEM activities. I'm as equally ignorant of science, technology and maths as I am of art. And that's because I'm a librarian first and foremost. And I don't even have really a passion for creating order as librarians do. The thing for me that I do what I do is to make the experience better for the people who use our services, our customers. I know people don't like that word, but I'm comfortable with it, so I'll use it. But it's students, so working in a higher education environment, it's students. Students are our predominant customer. And in all those environments I've worked in, research libraries, teaching-led universities, health libraries, further education libraries, art libraries, the common thing there is the students. And I've realised that actually, regardless of the environment, we mustn't adapt the pedagogy side of working in an educational environment. So how students are, how they learn, how they behave, that should be the thing that we respond to. So we mustn't try and change that. We have to adapt ourselves to work with whatever pedagogic phenomenon is happening in that institution. So I realised that I mustn't adapt, try and change the art librarianship practice that I was encountering for the first time to fit in with my own, kind of STEM values, because what was happening in the arts environment was entirely appropriate for those art students. And it just made me think loads and loads on how I needed to adapt and how I needed to embrace some of these great practices and passions. And I realised fairly quickly that you can have a lot of fun in an arts education environment. And I go back to that art librarianship capital and the truckloads of creativity and innovation that both the library staff have and the students have. And that makes for a wonderful mix when you put them together. So I realised actually what I need to do as a library manager in this new arts education world is enable even more generation and more exchange of art librarianship capital. And that leads me on to I think it's my final reflection. I'll just double check because I haven't got much time left. It is. What's transferable out of those illustrations aren't particularly brilliant there, but what's transferable from all these experiences in both directions, from STEM to STEAM and from STEAM to STEM. And the beauty of art librarianship capital is it doesn't have to just stay in the art college. It's transferable. And I think that's what I'm now seeing in Goldsmiths, is there's definitely an art librarianship attitude, value and behaviour. I'm going to point over here because I've got Goldsmiths colleagues over here, UAL colleagues over there. But those ethics and values from being an art librarian can feed into supporting other disciplines and supporting disciplines in a multidisciplinary environment, which Goldsmiths is. So for me, it's all transferable in both directions and at every level, whether you're operating as a teaching and learning practitioner, liaison type role, or you're operating as a library manager. You can go both ways, but it becomes easier and it's far more exciting and more fun when you do it in a kind of arts environment. So we get this wonderfully rich, exciting and creative environment in which to work. And so some of these attitudes and values which are transferable, I would always encourage the librarians who work in my teams to be creative, to be innovative, to take risks, to try things out, to be bold, to be adventurous, to be collaborative. And I hope that resonates with everyone here who is working in those arts environments, because I think the environment affords us to do that. I was also going to add, I encourage librarians to ask forgiveness rather than permission, but I realise I've got quite a lot of my staff in the room. And we'll interpret that differently later on. But for me, the arts education world enables all of this, and it, I think, kind of echoes what Pat was saying yesterday in her keynote, that art librarians are creative practitioners. It's a form of creative practice. And I think I've got the best of all worlds at Goldsmiths, because I think I've got these wonderful attitudes and behaviours, but permeating through a kind of range and I suppose a deeper range of disciplines. And it's been, really pleasing to see lots of my staff, Leslie Althea, Laura Jesser and Eve, all presenting at the conference, and not necessarily about their experiences of art librarianship, but of their experiences within their educational environment. So I'm going to finish there, And there will be time for questions. I think Nick might jump up and chair that. But ultimately, I don't think being an art librarian is about having a love or passion for art and artefacts and objects. I think that really helps. And it does add to that art librarianship capital that I've kind of introduced. But I think it's more a love and a passion and an enthusiasm for creativity. And it's creativity for me that's the key. Creativity as a librarian. And a love, a passion and enthusiasm for creative people. So that's the people you're interacting with, you're liaising with, and you're teaching. And that in itself makes you the creative person as well. And that's what makes us art librarians. And as for me, I'm still not sure whether I am one now. But thank you very much for listening anyway.
That was great, thank you, Leo. And most relevant tie as well.
I always sport my book tie and book cufflinks.
So there is a roaming microphone for questions. Please do ask questions. This is a great opportunity to have a conversation about what's happening in art librarianship in the UK and elsewhere. We have a question already.
Thanks. Thank you, Leo. I just wanted to say some art librarians don't work in educational establishments. We work in museums. So would your analysis apply to art librarians who work in museums and art galleries?
I would think so, and I can only draw on my own experience, and I've only ever worked in educational establishments. But I think those fundamental attributes of the passion for creativity, that shouldn't differ. I just think that that's my own conclusions and deductions, that it's the arts environment. I've referred to it as an arts education environment because that's where I work in. But that's part of what generates the creativity and innovation. So without having that experience, I would hope that's transferable into other art sectors.
Sorry, I can't see that side of the room. Leo, can I ask you then? You talked a bit about some of your management skills, some of your leadership role things. I think there's probably quite a few people in the room that are primarily practitioners and are being dragged slightly unwillingly into management and leadership roles. I wondered if you could just comment on maybe some tips for acquiring some of those skills.
That's a good question. Now, it's slightly uncomfortable standing here not talking about me as a manager when there's at least 10, if not 20 people in the room who've either directly or indirectly been managed by me. So they may beg to differ, but you can get the real story from them later on. But what I regard as management, that's why I think it's transferable, Nick, is it's that opportunity to influence far more widely. So I think when you do work as a lone practitioner, your sphere of influence is quite narrow. It's whoever you personally can talk to and interact with and have an impact on. And that's what I would say is part of the joy of management, is if you can get a team of people thinking collectively, problem solving collectively, and moving things on to the next level collectively, whatever that might be, then that sphere of influence broadens, and you've got more people to then have more spheres of influence, and you can have a greater impact on a programme, on a course, on an institution, on a whole sector. But I think that's where it starts, and I think that's why it's transferable. And I can see if people are comfortable working as a lone practitioner, that's absolutely fine, of course it is. But it's if you want greater impact, I think moving into management is the right thing to do.
Would anyone else like to ask a question?
Cassie's smiling, she's going to put me to the test here.
Yesterday, Pat Christie alluded to the fact that maybe we need change in the education of librarians and the next generation and the complexity of that. And I wondered if you had any views about how we bring up the next generation of librarians, especially in the context of what you're talking about today, about creativity being an important attribute. Yeah,
no, I agree, Cassie. And I have to say, I am very removed from the kind of library school education. I'm not sure what the curriculum is. I think there's people in the room who are much closer to that. That said, if I was ever asked my opinion of what should be in a library and information management curriculum, there needs to be something in there about being a creator, being creative, being innovative, kind of problem solving, taking risks. I don't know what it would look like, but I don't think we do equip ourselves for that currently. So.
Is anyone else itching to ask a question? Leo, just on your slides, what's a new bohemian?
Oh, right. I meant to qualify that. Did anyone see, there was a programme last year it was Grayson Perry had a programme called The New Bohemians. It was just talking about the kind of switch from old Bohemia to the new Bohemians. And I only put it up there because what really struck me is they interviewed a bunch of students from Camberwell College who claimed to be the new Bohemians. And I just thought, yeah, I think you are. So I thought, and because I thought that, and I think I was probably working at UAL at the time, I thought, yeah, so that kind of, for me, that emulates the difference. We've got different students, and that's why art librarianship is different. So that's where New Bohemians came in, Nick.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Nick.
Now, in a very slight change to our advertised programme, we're going to have a word from one of our major sponsors, Bloomsbury, who actually sponsored last night's reception, but last night's reception had a very full programme. So please welcome our Bloomsbury Publishing representative. Sponsors are very important. The conference won't be able to happen without them. And as a bonus, Bloomsbury are actually a really good publisher.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. Nice to know we're a very good publisher. So we're very happy to be sponsoring ARLIS UK, so thank you very much for having us. We'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to our award-winning fashion resource, which we've recently relaunched with a brand new design. So today I'm going to be talking to you about Bloomsbury Fashion Central. So Bloomsbury Fashion Central is our home to our online resources for fashion. It brings together our major reference works, exclusive articles, ebooks, biographies, lesson plans, textbooks, video content, image content, and much more. So it creates a hugely rich educational resource for research and study. Currently, Bloomsbury Fashion Central comprises 3 different databases, the BERG Fashion Library, the Fashion Photography Archive, and the FAIRCHILD Books Library. And over the next year, we're going to be adding 2 new databases, which are up there, Bloomsbury Fashion Business Cases and the Fashion Video Archive. So we'll be diversifying our content and making Bloomsbury Fashion Central the go-to resource across all areas of fashion. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each of those databases I've mentioned, starting with the BERG Fashion Library, which is our most well-established product. So the BERG Fashion Library has global coverage of both Western and non-Western fashion, from prehistory up to today. And it offers students and scholars a comprehensive view of dressing the body throughout history. The jewel in BFL's crown is the BERG Encyclopedia of World Dress and Fashion, which is a 10-volume major reference work of world dress history, which we update twice a year with new articles. In addition, BFL contains seminal reference materials, over 100 scholarly ebooks, thousands of images from prestigious museum partners around the world, as well as teaching and study resources and a timeline. So the Fashion Photography Archive. This contains over 750,000 images from the fashion shows from the pre-digital era, many of them rare and never seen before, which are all edited by esteemed fashion curator Valerie Steele, who's at the museum at FIT. We're currently live with 500,000 images, articles, and designer biographies, and we will have loaded the remaining images by the end of next year. The archive contains fashion royalty, so Chanel, Dior, Westwood, McQueen, as well as the then up-and-coming designers, as well as street-style images from New York, Paris, and London, and graduate shows from prominent fashion schools, including Central St Martin's, where we were last night. So the breadth of the archive is really unrivaled. And what's really special about the archive is we have very detailed metadata that accompanies each image, so the users can search by really specific information like colours, textiles and materials, and find the images they need for research and inspiration. All of the images are also licensed for educational use, so students can cite from an authoritative source. It's not just Pinterest or Google Images. And they can explore some of the most transformational moments in recent fashion history. The Fairchild Books Library is our final live database, and this contains 145 textbooks that offer students a toolkit to enter and thrive in the fashion industry. This includes everything from the creative to the corporate, and the content covers design, merchandising, fashion business, textiles, and more. The Fairchild Books Library disaggregates the content from the traditional book structure and allows instructors and students to discover chapter-level results and create custom text packages for teaching and learning. The textbooks are accompanied by studios, which are online learning environments, so students can study in new interactive ways with multiple choice quizzes, videos, and flashcards. And then moving on to our databases that we're working on right now to launch over the next year. Bloomsbury Fashion Business Cases is going to be launching in November this year. It'll be offering a comprehensive online collection of business cases that are specifically designed for the fashion industry. And it will address all areas of the fashion curriculum, from merchandising to retailing and design, with varying levels and approaches. Business cases are a really important educational tool that allows students to step into the role of a decision maker in the fashion industry and put the theory that they've learned into practice. The cases are curated by subject specialists for a global community of fashion educators and students, and they're sourced from around the world, including the USA, Asia, Australia, Europe, UK, and more. And we'll be updating the cases with new cutting-edge content twice a year. I'm going to show you a bit of a visual representation of our final product, which will be coming out in the autumn next year, which we have partnered with Yoox Net-a-Porter to bring you an archive of fashion runway videos. From us. Thank you very much.